Ever wondered how the brightest Hollywood icons ended up losing the palatial estates that once defined their fame? From Gloria Swanson's ivory White House of Inglewood to Errol Flynn's scandal-plagued Mullholland Farm, these lavish residences dazzled with parties, star guests, and legendary extravagance. Yet behind the gilded walls, bitter divorces, financial freefalls, and personal demons quietly unraveled even the greatest fortunes. What truly caused these dreams to crumble? Let's uncover the stories of 10 extraordinary mansions that once symbolized success. Gloria Swanson, the White House of Inglewood. In the roaring 1920s, silent film queen Gloria Swanson was living as large as any Hollywood royalty. At the height of her fame, she became linked to a palatial mansion in Englewood, New Jersey, a 24,000-square-foot Mediterranean revival estate, later nicknamed Gloria Crest. This ivory-colored villa, with its arched windows and red-tiled roofs, was built in 1926 by Count Stefan Poniatowski for his wife and boasted 8 bedrooms, 14 bathrooms, and opulent details rivaling European manners. Inside, Gloria Crest featured Tiffany glass skylights that dappled the halls with colored light, gilded moldings, carved wood paneling, and a grand marble fireplace mantel reminiscent of a Renaissance palace. Exotic gardens with rare trees sprawled across 5 gated acres, complete with a man-made lake, waterfalls, an island gazebo, and even an aviary. Swanson herself did not commission the estate's construction, but by 1929, a twist of fate put this mansion in her hands. After the stock market crash, Count Stefan lost his fortune and sold the estate to Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., who was Swanson's secret lover and financial advisor. Kennedy in turn gifted the mansion to Gloria Swanson at the peak of their affair. For a time, the actress enjoyed the high life here, hosting elegant soirees in the banquet-sized salons and strolling past the 9-foot waterfalls and reflecting pools that graced the grounds. But Swanson's extravagant lifestyle was catching up to her. By 1927, she was already in dire financial straits from career missteps and lavish spending, reduced to a mere $65 in her bank account. Kennedy's involvement proved double-edged. While he bankrolled her film Queen Kelly, production chaos drove costs sky-high and generated scandal. By the early 1930s, their partnership deteriorated amid mutual suspicions of fraud and betrayal. Ultimately, Swanson's fairy tale estate slipped away as the bills mounted and the affair ended. The Englewood mansion quietly passed to new owners during the 1930s as Gloria struggled to pay off debts. Exactly how she parted with it remains shrouded in rumor, but her presence there abruptly ceased. What we do know is that the woman who once spent millions in the 1920s was essentially broke by the mid-30s. Swanson had to fire staff, sell off assets, and retreat from her palace. The White House of Inglewood, with all its costly splendor, became just another asset liquidated in the wake of her financial ruin. Decades later, the mansion itself fell into disrepair. Errol Flynn, the scandalous Mullholland Farm. Swashbuckling film star Errol Flynn personified Hollywood excess in the 1930s and 40s, and nowhere is that more evident than at Mullholland Farm, the notorious hilltop estate he built as his personal playground. In 1941, riding high on hits like Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood, the 32-year-old Flynn purchased 11.5 acres of prime Hollywood Hills land off Mullholland Drive. There, he set out to design a 2-story ranch-style mansion that was part gentleman's farm, part pleasure palace. The result, completed in 1942, was a sprawling 4,000-square-foot California colonial home with white clapboard walls and a rambling layout. It featured all-American touches alongside decadent additions like a separate casino house for high-stakes gambling. Flynn spared no expense customizing the home. He sank a fortune into secret improvements, even hiring Warner Brothers craftsmen to install hidden passageways behind the walls. Famously, he fitted certain rooms with 2-way mirrors and peepholes, allowing the rogue actor to spy on female guests from a concealed loft or catch illicit glimpses through a mirror above a guest bed. These salacious features, later exposed in the press as Errol Flynn's 2-way mirror, cemented the mansion's infamy. Mullholland Farm quickly became the scene of legendary Hollywood parties. Every Sunday, Flynn threw open his doors for open house revelry. The living room swelled with starlets and studio bigwigs sipping cocktails. In the attached casino, one could find liquor flowing and poker games where fortunes changed hands. One wild tale even has fellow actor John Barrymore's corpse stolen and propped in Flynn's study as a morbid prank by drunken friends. Scandal truly rocked Mullholland Farm in 1942 when two underage girls alleged Flynn had seduced them at his estate and aboard his yacht. The ensuing statutory rape trial turned the home into a legal war room. Though he was ultimately acquitted, the legal fees and lurid publicity marked the beginning of Flynn's financial and personal downward spiral. By the late 1940s, cracks in Errol Flynn's charmed life had spread to Mullholland Farm. His first wife, actress Lily Demita, had divorced him in 1942 and secured hefty alimony for their son. Flynn had chosen to pay her in monthly installments rather than a lump sum, even as he poured money into finishing the house, a decision that would end up costing him the house, one biographer noted. Flynn frequently missed the $1,000 payments, and an enraged Lily hauled him back into court repeatedly. Meanwhile, Flynn's lavish spending continued unabated. He partied and drank hard, burning through cash as fast as it came. Mounting tax debts and legal bills finally pushed him to the brink. In 1953, a broken Flynn left the United States for Europe in search of any film work that could pay off what he owed in back taxes and debts to Demita. He never returned to live at Mullholland. Demita ultimately won a court judgment against him and took possession of the beloved farm to satisfy unpaid alimony. The estate that had seen such excess was soon sold off by Lily. Flynn literally lost the roof over his head to the ex-wife he'd tried to shortchange. Thus, the revelrous ranch on Mullholland met its end as Flynn's fortunes crumbled. Marion Davies, Ocean House on the Beach. Hollywood actress Marion Davies, a star of the silent era and longtime mistress of newspaper tycoon William Randolph Hearst, reigned over one of the most extravagant residences of the 1920s. Ocean House, her private seaside playground on Santa Monica's Gold Coast. This estate was Hearst's grand gift to Davies, a sprawling 5-acre compound completed in 1929 and designed by architect Julia Morgan. By the early 1930s, Ocean House was the talk of Hollywood. It wasn't just a mansion, it was practically a resort in itself. The main house stood 3 stories tall, with a whopping 110 rooms. Almost as big as the White House, bigger maybe, Marion quipped of its constant additions. 4 additional guest houses dotted the grounds to host her family and VIP friends, and a staff of 32 servants kept everything running. The estate's amenities read like a fantasy: tennis courts, lush formal gardens, and a 110-foot heated saltwater swimming pool lined with Italian marble. A Venetian marble bridge spanned the center of that pool, and Davies's gold room ballroom glittered with gilded detail for society events. The total price tag, a staggering $7 million spent by Hearst, about $3 million to construct this private palace, and $4 million more to furnish it in the finest European antiques and silks. As actress Colleen Moore remarked, Ocean House was the biggest house on the beach between San Diego and Vancouver. Throughout the 1930s, Marion and Hearst threw legendary parties at the beach house, entertaining everyone from Charlie Chaplin and Greta Garbo to political luminaries. Champagne flowed in its ornately mirrored parlors, and starlets danced under crystal chandeliers. Yet by the mid-1940s, the tides of fortune shifted. Hearst's publishing empire was hit hard by the Great Depression and wartime austerity. By 1937, he was in a serious financial crisis, forced to sell off art and take out loans. Maintaining multiple enormous properties became untenable. As Hearst's health declined in the 1940s, Marion Davies made the painful decision to sell her beloved Ocean House in 1947 for $600,000, a fraction of its original cost. The buyer was hotelier Joseph Drown, who promptly converted the mansion into a luxury hotel and beach club. The very halls where Marion had presided in glamour were soon trod by paying guests and club members. Davies herself lamented changes to her paradise, particularly when the ornate Venetian bridge was removed from the pool. Absolutely wrong for them to remove it, she said wistfully of her lost oasis. Within a decade, the Grand Dame of Santa Monica's coast met a tragic end. In 1956, amid community complaints and costly upkeep, the 110-room mansion was demolished. Only a guest house and the marble pool remained, ghosts of the grandeur that was. Marion Davies had watched her fairy tale estate slip away piece by piece, first sold due to financial pressures and Hearst's waning fortunes, then literally torn down. By the time of her death in 1961, the site had changed hands to the state of California, eventually to become a public beach facility. William Randolph Hearst, St. Donat's Castle in Wales. Media magnate William Randolph Hearst was no stranger to monumental real estate, but one of his most romantic and costly ventures was St. Donat's Castle, a genuine 12th century castle in Wales that Hearst purchased in 1925 on a whim. Ever the collector of castles and art, Hearst spotted St. Donat's in a magazine and, despite being an ocean away, bought it sight unseen. The medieval fortress came with 800 years of history, complete with dank dungeons, a moat, immense stone halls, and even its own resident ghost wailing on stormy nights. Hearst immediately set about transforming St. Donat's into a lavish European retreat for himself and Marion Davies. He shipped tons of antiques and art treasures across the Atlantic to furnish its cold chambers. Within a few years, the castle's interiors were filled to the brim with extravagant pieces. Ancient tapestries, carved oak paneling, stained glass, and entire ceilings salvaged from English manor houses. One prized acquisition was a massive 1778 family portrait by John Singleton Copley, which Hearst hung proudly in the castle's library above the great banqueting hall. Walking through St. Donat's under Hearst's ownership felt like touring a museum. In fact, by 1935, Fortune magazine crowned Hearst the world's #1 collector of objets d'art, noting that at one point he accounted for 25% of global art market activity. Even playwright George Bernard Shaw, visiting the fully decked-out castle, quipped, "This is what God would have built if he had the money." For all its splendor, St. Donat's became an extravagant folly. The castle's remote location in Wales meant Hearst and Davies visited only occasionally, treating it as a private getaway for entertaining European friends and dignitaries. When World War II erupted, the property fell into disuse and was even loaned to the British military, at one point housing wounded soldiers after the Normandy invasion. Maintaining a medieval castle during wartime proved impractical, even for Hearst. Meanwhile, the tycoon's U.S. finances hit dire straits in the late 1930s. His over-leveraged company nearly went bankrupt in 1937, forcing Hearst to drastically retrench and liquidate assets. St. Donat's, never a source of income, became a prime candidate to sacrifice. In the early 1940s, the aging Hearst reluctantly let go of his Welsh dream. Marion Davies sold St. Donat's Castle on his behalf to raise quick cash, reportedly cutting a check to Hearst for $1 million from the sale proceeds. It was a sobering moment. The man who once impulsively bought castles now had to sell them to stay solvent. After the war, Hearst formally sold off St. Donat's and its contents. Shiploads of precious art and furniture were auctioned off in London. The castle itself found a new life when it was purchased by a British educational trust. Thus, Hearst lost his far-flung fairy tale fortress to the realities of financial ruin and wartime necessity. While he never publicly mourned St. Donat's, the evidence of his emotional attachment is in the sheer scale of what he invested there. When he died in 1951, Hearst Castle in California, the one estate he refused to relinquish despite enormous maintenance costs, still stood, but St. Donat's was long gone from his portfolio. In a final twist, even Hearst's beloved California castle would leave family hands. With upkeep untenable, the Hearst Corporation donated it to the state of California in 1958, just years after his death. The saga of St. Donat's Castle is a poignant chapter where Hearst's penchant for grandeur collided with harsh economics, forcing the surrender of a medieval jewel he had lovingly, if briefly, brought back to life. Rudolph Valentino, Falcon Lair's Final Flight. Silent film heartthrob. Rudolph Valentino channeled his romantic nature into the design of his dream home, Falcon Lair, a secluded Beverly Hills estate perched high in Benedict Canyon. In 1925, flush with cash from hits like The Chic, Valentino purchased a 4-acre hillside property for $175,000. The estate already had a new Spanish colonial revival mansion designed by Wallace Neff, white stucco walls, a red tile roof, and arched doorways evoking a Spanish villa. Valentino affectionately named it Falcon Lair in honor of a film project, The Hooded Falcon, that he never got to complete. He proceeded to lavishly furnish the 16-room mansion with treasures from his travels. Shipments of European antiques arrived to fill Falcon Lair's expansive living rooms and bedrooms. The star proudly installed Italian marble statues, gilded mirrors, and plush oriental rugs. He even adorned the landscape with imported Italian cypress and olive trees, creating terraced gardens that gave the estate a Mediterranean ambiance. Valentino, ever the aesthete, filled the house with antiques, imported European furnishings, and memorabilia of his globe-trotting life. For a final touch of Hollywood practicality, he built a 9-foot-high concrete wall around the perimeter to keep out obsessed fans who had taken to sneaking onto the grounds. Yet Falcon Lair was also a house of personal tumult. Valentino bought it intending to share it with his wife, designer Natasha Rambova, but their marriage disintegrated just months later. By 1926, the newly divorced Valentino lived there largely alone. Still, he didn't live like a recluse. Falcon Lair saw extravagant parties as Valentino played host to Hollywood elite, its hilltop loggias echoing with music and laughter late into the night. Friends marveled at his hospitality and the villa's elegance. Tragically, this idyllic chapter was short. In August 1926, at just 31 years old, Rudolph Valentino died suddenly in New York from peritonitis, shocking the world. The loss of the matinee idol was a personal tragedy that also spelled the end of his life at Falcon Lair. Valentino's finances, stretched by high spending and an expensive lifestyle, were in disarray at his death. He reportedly died in debt. Thus, within weeks, his prized estate was on the auction block. To satisfy creditors and settle his affairs, Falcon Lair was auctioned off in 1926, soon after Valentino's funeral. Crowds of curiosity seekers and bidders trooped through the mansion's grand salon and bedrooms, evaluating the possessions of the late, great lover of the screen. The very furnishings Valentino had so lovingly curated under the painted wood ceilings were sold piece by piece. The estate itself changed hands for far less than Valentino had invested. In one swift blow, the dream home was lost, falling victim to both financial necessity and the absence of its creator. Over the ensuing decades, Falcon Lair passed through many owners, but the spirit of Valentino lingered. The mansion gained a reputation as a haunted house, with some claiming the actor's ghost roamed its halls, grieving for his lost haven. Whether or not one believes such tales, Falcon Lair's fate is indisputable. Born of Valentino's romantic vision and lost due to the cruel twist of his untimely death, it stands as a poignant symbol of the fleeting nature of fame and fortune in Hollywood's golden era. Gabor, the Belair Barbie mansion. No list of lavish lifestyles is complete without Gabor, the glamour icon famed for her diamonds and droll wit. In 1973, Zia purchased a palatial French Regency-style mansion in Belair, an upscale enclave of Los Angeles. Painted a canary yellow and perched on a hill with sweeping city views, the home became her cherished residence for the next 4 decades. Gabor wasted no time putting her personal stamp on the property. During the 1980s, she commissioned a major remodel, adding an entire second-story ballroom level to the originally 1-story house. This upper floor, accessible via a grand staircase, was styled like a Monte Carlo nightclub, a glamorous, entertaining space with a full bar, a wall of windows opening to a terrace, and black-tie ambience for the countless parties Zia loved to host. The mansion's interiors reflected her Baroque taste. She filled every room with opulent decor, gilded French antique furniture, crystal chandeliers, and even a golden piano in the salon. One closet became the stuff of legend, reportedly containing 5,000 dresses and gowns, an entire room devoted to her lavish wardrobe. And indeed, the guest list was as gilded as the furniture. Queen Elizabeth II took tea in Zia's living room. U.S. Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush dined under her chandeliers, and Elizabeth Taylor popped by for soirees. This mansion also came with Hollywood lore of its own. According to Zia's New York Times obituary, the estate was built by Howard Hughes and formerly owned by Elvis Presley. For Zia, it was the ultimate symbol of having made it in Hollywood society despite being a Hungarian transplant. She adored the home so much she swam naked in its pool each morning and often posed for press photos in its manicured gardens. However, as the years wore on, glamour gave way to grim reality. By the 2010s, Gabor's health was in steep decline. She was bedridden after a hip injury and leg amputation, and medical bills were piling up. The once grand hostess could no longer entertain, and her ninth husband, Frederick von Anhalt, struggled to maintain the expensive property in 24-hour nursing care. A family feud erupted when von Anhalt decided to sell the Belair mansion in 2011 to cover costs, an act opposed by Zia's daughter, Francesca Hilton. In a bittersweet deal, the house was sold to investors for $11 million in 2013 under the condition that Zia could live out her life there. Essentially, the Gabor estate was gone, sold out from under her due to financial necessity and mounting healthcare debts, even though she remained under its roof. When Zsa Gabor passed away in 2016 at the age of 99, she did so in the home she had lavished with attention, but no longer owned. The new owners wasted little time. After her death, they demolished parts of the structure to make way for redevelopment. Thus ended the saga of Zia's palace, a site of innumerable cocktail parties and celebrity visits, ultimately sacrificed to pay for the final chapter of her life. The dramatic contrast between the feisty socialite hostess and her quiet, hospital bed exit under financial duress underscores how even for Hollywood's fabulously wealthy, fortunes can turn on a dime. Johnny Weissmuller, Tarzan's Lost Paradise. As Tarzan of the Apes, Johnny Weissmuller swung on jungle vines, and as a Hollywood star, he swung for the fences, building a one-of-a-kind estate in 1930s Belair. Fresh off Olympic swimming glory and newfound film stardom, Weissmuller hired architect Paul R. Williams to design his dream home at 414 St. Pierre Road, a pink Italianate palace set on 3.5 rolling acres. Completed in 1932, the mansion was a sprawling 8,700 square foot blend of Mediterranean revival styles, part Italian Renaissance, part Spanish colonial, with white stucco walls and a red barrel-tiled roof. But Weissmuller himself had enormous influence on the design. A man of outsized tastes, he requested features that echoed his on-screen jungle persona and his love of modern technology. The most famous was the 300-foot serpentine swimming pool that meandered around the house like a tropical lagoon. Fed by an electric waterfall and bridged by decorative footbridges, this was no ordinary pool. It curled cleverly through the landscaped gardens, large enough that Weissmuller reportedly paddled a small boat on it. The Los Angeles Times dubbed the property an international garden for its extensive array of rare plants, terraces, and even a Venetian-style canal feature. Inside, the mansion was sumptuously appointed with high coffered ceilings, hand-painted fleur-de-lis moldings, carved stone fireplaces, and a grand staircase with an imported Spanish palace gate made of gilded iron. One wing held a stately ballroom and a playroom where Johnny kept a custom bar, billiards table, and even a movie projector with a drop-down screen for screening his latest films to friends. This was a house built for both show and play, equally suited to charity garden tours and raucous all-night poker games. In fact, Weissmuller later reminisced about high-stakes poker in that very game room, where a man would win or lose $50,000 in an evening amid Prohibition-era revelry. For a while, Tarzan truly was king of his castle. Weissmuller and his second wife, actress Lupe Velez, lived in high style at the estate, throwing lavish parties around the lagoon-like pool under strings of lights. But domestic bliss did not last. By 1932, Lupe Velez filed for divorce, citing Johnny's infidelity and wild lifestyle, and the split would prove disastrous for Weissmuller's hold on the mansion. Lupe was known for her fiery temper and her determination in divorce court, When the marriage officially ended in August 1932, she managed to walk away with virtually everything. Crucially, the estate had been put in Loop's real name, and Weissmuller lost claim to it in the settlement. In fact, Natalie Talmadge sold the entire property just 2 months later, in September 1932. Johnny's extravagant jungle palace was gone with the stroke of a pen, taken by an ex-wife who refused to rein in her spending and chose to liquidate it for cash. The buyer, showbiz entrepreneur Mrs. Fanchon Simon, purchased the estate, and by 1938, it resold again to a Milwaukee millionaire for $250,000. Weissmuller, meanwhile, was left reeling, not only from the loss of his home, but also from Lupe's barring him from seeing their young son. Heartbroken and financially wounded, the Olympic champion moved out and downsized dramatically. The demise of Weissmuller's paradise marked one of Hollywood's most sobering property losses. What was built to be a monument to a larger-than-life personality turned into a prize lost in a bitter divorce. Weissmuller's career continued, but he never again attempted such a grand dwelling. The St. Pierre Road estate went on to have a strange afterlife. It hosted a revolving door of famous occupants, including Marion Davies, and decades later, members of the pop group The Mamas and the Papas, and even Mick Jagger in the 1970s. Yet, by the 21st century, the once magnificent Nicolosi estate fell into abandonment. Windows boarded, the legendary Serpentine pool empty and cracked. Declared a historic monument but left to decay, it stands as an eerie shell of its former glory. For Johnny Weissmuller, though, the estate was lost long ago in 1932, a victim of divorce and financial unraveling that even Tarzan's strength couldn't prevent. Hedi Lamar, Hedro Farm's simplicity and sacrifice. Dubbed the most beautiful woman in the world in the 1940s, actress Hedi Lamar surprised many by preferring a down-to-earth home life far from Hollywood's prying eyes. In the mid-1940s, at the peak of her MGM career, Lamar acquired a secluded property in the hills above Beverly Hills that she lovingly called Hedro Farm. Rather than a glittering mansion, it was designed as a rustic farmhouse retreat where Hedi could shed her starlet image and be herself. A visiting journalist in those years noted that the house is to be a farmhouse in spirit, as well as architecture, furnished not with Parisian silks, but with simple pine furniture, chintz fabrics, and braided cottage rugs. On this small estate, Hedi embraced an unexpected domesticity. She kept chickens and tended to a vegetable garden, often seen in jodhpurs and a sun hat rather than glamorous gowns. It was a conscious antidote to the spotlight, a place where the inventor side of her could tinker in peace by night, and the housefrau side could cook and care for her children by day. Indeed, Hedro Farm is where Lamar raised her 3 young children in the late 1940s, offering them a childhood with nothing of formality or pretense, as one magazine described the cozy home. Yet, while life on the farm seemed idyllic, Lamar's fortunes were quietly dwindling. By the 1950s, her film roles had slowed, and a string of failed marriages strained her finances. She sold off Hedro Farm and other real estate as she downsized. By the early 1960s, Hedi had moved to a smaller home in Florida. In the public eye, it appeared she simply retreated from Hollywood. Behind the scenes, however, things were far more dire. By the mid-1960s, Hedi Lamar was effectively broke. One biographical source bluntly states that by that time, she couldn't pay her utility bills and often went hungry, except when friends gave her food. It's a shocking turn for someone who once commanded lavish salaries and built a bucolic haven for herself. But lavish spending during her heyday, costly legal battles, and the lack of residuals from her groundbreaking invention left her with little. Lamar even had a couple of embarrassing shoplifting arrests in 1966 and 1991, which she vehemently denied, but which highlighted her financial distress. Hedro Farm was likely sold off sometime in the 1950s as Hedi's situation worsened. One piece of evidence, actress Anne Margaret and her husband Roger Smith bought Lamar's former Benedict Canyon house in the late 1960s, indicating Hedi had let it go. Thus, the serene refuge she had poured her hopes into was lost, not to scandal or divorce, but to the slow bleed of financial ruin and retreat from stardom. By her final years, Lamar lived alone in a modest Orlando suburb apartment, far from any farm or mansion, communicating with the world mostly by telephone. When she died in 2000, she left behind an estate valued around $3.3 million, a fraction of what her peers had, and much of it from a late-life invention payout, rather than her once grand Hollywood earnings. Hedi Lamar's story is a subtle one on our list. Her mansion makeover was actually a simplification, turning a fancy house into a farm, and the loss came as a quiet sell-off rather than a headline-grabbing foreclosure. But in its own way, it's as dramatic. The brilliant star who once craved simplicity ended her days in obscurity, having sacrificed her cherished home and lifestyle to survive when the spotlight faded. Howard Hughes, the hermit of Mirfield Mansion. Eccentric billionaire Howard Hughes lived in many places, penthouse hotel suites, desert inns, even secretive bungalows. But in his younger days, Hughes maintained an opulent estate that symbolized his initial embrace of Hollywood's high life, only to abandon it as his infamous reclusiveness set in. That residence was a 30-room Spanish colonial mansion in Hancock Park, Los Angeles, built in 1926 by architect Roland E. Coate. Hughes came to Hollywood in the late 1920s with oil fortune money and big dreams, and by 1928, he had moved with his first wife Ella into this impressive home on Mirfield Road. The estate was a classic California hacienda, adobe-style white walls, a red tile roof, and a dramatic two-story library wing. Surrounded by manicured lawns and situated right along a golf course, it was an enviable piece of real estate in a prestigious neighborhood. Inside, the mansion exuded 1920s luxury. A sweeping cantilevered balcony ran across the central courtyard, overlooking a tiled fountain. The living rooms featured open-beamed ceilings and Spanish archways. Ornate wrought iron chandeliers and hand-carved wooden doors, imported from Mexico, gave a feel of old Monterey charm. At 10,000-plus square feet, there was space for numerous guest suites, staff quarters, and entertainment salons. For a time, Hughes played the gracious Hollywood host here. He threw fancy dinners and screened his films in a private projection room, reveling in his successes like the Oscar-winning 2 Arabian Nights, which had enabled this upgrade from a mere bungalow. But as Hughes's legend grew in the 1930s, so did his personal troubles. A notorious perfectionist, he sank himself into ever more ambitious projects at the expense of his social life. After a near-fatal plane crash in 1946 and worsening mental health, Hughes began withdrawing from public view. His mansion saw fewer gatherings and more drawn shades. By 1942, Hughes had effectively vacated the Mirfield house altogether. He left Los Angeles during World War II to focus on military contracts, and upon return, rather than resettle the mansion, he ensconced himself in a film studio screening room for months on end. Famously, in 1947, Hughes isolated in a darkened room at the studio for 4 months, indulging in a downward spiral of addiction and paranoia. The grand Hancock Park home sat largely unused, attended by caretakers, while Hughes drifted between hotel suites. In the early 1950s, Hughes formally sold the estate and never again owned a traditional house. Instead, he took up permanent residence in sealed-off penthouses, first at Los Angeles' Beverly Hills Hotel and later in Las Vegas' Desert Inn. Essentially, Hughes lost his mansion not through financial duress, but through psychological retreat. He walked away from it, along with much of normal life, as his eccentricities took over. In a sense, the fate of Hughes's mansion was sealed by his transformation into a hermit. The extravagant hacienda that once symbolized Hughes's youthful boldness was sold and passed to new owners. Meanwhile, Hughes lived out his last decades in cloistered hotel rooms with blacked-out windows, surrounded by tissue boxes and codeine vials, far removed from the sunlight and social whirl of Hancock Park. When he died in 1976, his personal real estate consisted of a few hotel leases and industrial properties, his splendid home long since gone. The story is a poignant one, a mansion effectively lost to personal tragedy as mental illness and fear drove one of the world's richest men to relinquish the trappings of his wealth. Hughes's Hancock Park estate, with its empty halls, stands as a mute witness to that transformation, once filled with promise and parties, later emptied by the ghost of a man who no longer wanted to be seen. Buster Keaton, The Italian Villa of Broken Dreams. Silent comedy genius. Buster Keaton built a house as inventive and grand as his film stunts, an Italian at Beverly Hills villa that became both his crowning achievement and the prize he lost in a heartbreaking divorce. In 1926, after scoring hits like The Navigator and Sherlock Jr., Keaton invested his fortune in a 3.5-acre estate on Pamela Drive behind the Beverly Hills Hotel. There, with the help of architect Jean Verge, Buster constructed a palatial home that mixed old-world elegance with Hollywood fun. The resulting mansion, often called Keaton's Italian Villa, was a 35-room white stucco palace, blending Mission, Spanish, Italian Renaissance, and Moorish design elements in a delightfully eclectic way. Its layout featured a central entry hall flanked by two wings that angled outward, embracing a vast lawn. The facade boasted carved stone balconies and arcades imported from Italy. Inside, one entered into a sunlit vestibule with a checkerboard terrazzo floor and a bubbling Italian marble fountain at its center. Keaton ensured every luxury: a massive living room opened through French doors to an airy loggia for indoor-outdoor entertaining. There was a wood-paneled library, a conservatory filled with exotic plants, and a formal dining room with a hand-painted beamed ceiling and French windows onto the garden. A grand staircase led up to the family's private quarters. Buster's master suite encompassed an entire wing, complete with a secret outside entrance and a hidden liquor cabinet. Prohibition was still on after all. His wife, Natalie Talmadge, claimed the opposite wing, which included an enormous wardrobe room for her couture, a pink marble bath with gold-plated fixtures, and a boudoir fit for a queen. The estate's grounds were equally spectacular. Keaton installed a Roman-style swimming pool with a mosaic tile bottom, one so elegant it resembled an ancient bathhouse pool. Beverly Hills nurseries landscaped the gardens, planting orchards of citrus, beds of roses, and hedges of fragrant shrubs. Given Buster's love of sports and games, he also added a billiard room with a trick pool table and a projection system to screen his films for friends. On weekends, the Keaton Villa became party central. Legendary poker games raged in the game room, and stars like Charlie Chaplin and Douglas Fairbanks were regular guests since they lived nearby. For a time, this grand estate symbolized Buster's comedic empire and personal happiness. He and Natalie had two young sons frolicking in that big yard, and the future seemed golden. Then came the fall. The late 1920s brought on personal and professional turmoil. Keaton's independent studio was taken over by MGM, cramping his creative freedom, and he began drinking heavily under the stress. Natalie, frustrated and accustomed to luxury, grew distant. By 1932, she filed for divorce, and it was a scorcher. Natalie Talmadge not only left Buster, she took him to the cleaners. In the divorce settlement, Natalie gained full custody of their sons, and, critically, she got the entire Beverly Hills estate, which, in a fatal mistake by Buster, had been put in her name. Buster Keaton lost his Italian villa virtually overnight. In September 1932, just 2 months after the divorce decree, Natalie sold the mansion and grounds to an MGM dance director's family. Keaton was barred from setting foot on the property that he had designed and loved. The comedian, who had once been worth millions, was left with almost nothing. Natalie had even emptied their joint accounts. Devastated, Buster spiraled further into alcoholism, at one point ending up in a sanatorium. He later said of that period, "I took to the bottle, and for 3 years, I didn't care if I lived or died." The villa that should have been his legacy became a painful reminder of what he'd lost due to divorce and financial collapse. In later years, Keaton recovered professionally and found happiness in a smaller home, but he never again owned an estate of that magnitude. The Italian villa itself changed hands multiple times. In 1938, it sold for $250,000 in an exchange involving cash and land. Over time, its fame faded, and by the 1950s, it was no longer widely recognized as Keaton's house. Finally, like many old Hollywood landmarks, the mansion was demolished in the 1950s, its land subdivided for new houses. Today, only the street name Pamela Drive and archival photos hint at its one-time glory. The destruction of the estate, long after Buster lost it, feels like an epilogue to his tragedy, the physical erasure of a dream. Keaton himself lived until 1966, regaining some late career honor, but the Italian villa remained the one that got away.